So I wanted to look at how stretching really works. Yoga is not all about stretching, but stretching is a fair component to what we're doing. So it's important to get a sense of how it works and why it works and what it's for and why it's such an important part of yoga. So stretching is a very complicated topic and really is no straightforward answer to what a stretch is. There are different dimensions to how we work with a stretch and what effect it has. So we need to know first that the soft tissue of the body is made up of muscles and connective tissue and what's known as the ECM, the extracellular matrix, which is the fluid that surrounds the tissues. The muscles themselves are made of fibers, and deeper down they're the kind of things that contract and make the body move. The fascia is made of collagen and is the connective tissue which holds things together and creates a structure. And then the extracellular matrix, the fluid in which everything is bathed, contains a lot of the nutrients and the hydration and allows the layers and allows the body to move fluidly. So when we do a stretch, what is stretching? And what's the effect on the different tissues we mentioned? So first of all, so we can stretch the muscles. Well, in fact, we stretch tissue. The tissue involves all of those three components: the muscles, the fascia, and the extracellular matrix, the fluid. So in terms of the muscles are made of individual units known as sarcomeres, and the sarcomeres are what actually contract. The chemical change creates the actual contraction. And the fibers, the sarcomeres are in fibers, the fibers are encased in fascia, and the individual fibers are bundled together in fiber bundles, which are also encased in fascia, and then the whole muscle itself is also encased in layers of fascia. So it's kind of fascial layers or bags around each of the different layers of muscle tissue. The fiber's job is to contract, as I say, and if you take a muscle fiber out of its encasing, if you dissect it and take it out, then it will shrink by about a third of its length, which basically means that a muscle fiber is held within the fascia in a kind of what they call pre-stretched state. So it's held a little bit long, and that gives it a kind of a dynamism that's immediately accessible by the body. The muscle fiber is kind of primed, I suppose, for movement by the fact that it's held within this fascial system. But an isolated muscle fiber can stretch very easily. So there's something about how it's encased which affects how the stretch works. So when we stretch an area of the body, then a good proportion of the resistance that we feel in the stretch is actually the fascial dimension, the connective tissue, which is feeling the stretch, which is more resistant to stretching compared to the muscle fibers, which are inside the fascia. And that also goes for the sensation of stretch. The sensation of stretch arises from within the muscle fibers, which are being lengthened, but a good proportion of that also arises from within the fascial component. There are nerve endings within the connective tissue which tell us that there's a feeling of stretch going on. So what's the effect of stretching on these different tissues then? How do we build flexibility? That's the sort of main question, isn't it? So tissues are designed to change in response to a repeated stimulus. And this is important to recognize. So if we do something once, the tissues will respond, but they'll kind of go back to the way they were before. If we do it multiple times, repeatedly, over a period of time, the tissues are designed to adapt to the kinds of things that we do often. And this actually goes for bone as well. So bone will strengthen and then will weaken depending on what we do and what stresses it feels, and same thing with tissue. Tissue will lay down, the muscles will grow, the muscles will lengthen, the tissue will grow, the tissue will shrink, depending on what we're doing, because it's adapting to the needs of the body, and the body's trying to stay efficient always. So there's no need to have stuff there that we don't ever use. It's kind of like trying to be efficient. So a repeated contraction of muscles especially under load, so when we're lifting weights, for example, will cause the body to build more muscle fibers in parallel. So the muscle fibers in parallel like this. So actually the muscle gets stronger, it gets fatter. And if you reduce the movement of the body, if you stop lifting weights, then of course the muscle mass will reduce, so the muscle will atrophy, there will be less muscle. Yeah, so equally so, if we stretch the tissue, it will cause the tissue to start lengthening. It will lay down more muscle fibers in series rather than parallel, so in front of it and behind each other, and also allow the fascial wrapping around it, the connective tissue also will lay down more collagen and lengthen it out, so the actual whole tissue structure becomes longer. So that's the repeated movement of the body, but actually the nervous system also plays a very important part in this. So it plays a part in the willingness of the tissues to stretch or to move. And that's via what we call the reflexes. The reflexes are very quick reactions in the nervous system. Typically, they're controlled by things in the spinal cord to stimulus that goes on. Very quick reactions, designed to protect the body from injury or damage, fast and unconscious in response to some kind of threat or danger or worry. So in terms of stretching, then a couple of important reflexes to consider. First is known as the stretch reflex, and that causes actually the muscle to contract, not to stretch, strange word, but actually the stretch reflex causes the muscle to contract when it's worried or it feels that the muscle is in danger of a tear. So it's going beyond its capability. And acts a little bit like a seatbelt mechanism in the car. You know, like a seatbelt, you pull it too much and it jams, you know. If you pull it slowly, it's okay. So it's kind of like this. So the stretch reflex, mediated by sensors called muscle spindles, and they're embedded in the muscle fibers themselves. The reflex dies away very quickly, meaning that if we move into a stretch gradually, then we can perhaps minimize this reflex from being activated. So that's when we go into a stretch slowly, we let the sensation die away, we move a little bit deeper, we let the sensation die away, gradually moving into a stretch, so that this reflex is minimally activated. Although it's very useful, you know, in situations where it's designed to work and stop the muscle from tearing. So the next reflex is called the myotatic stretch reflex. It's kind of a variation on the first one. When the muscle feels a shock, then it causes the muscle to contract to maintain structural integrity. So a shock might be when let's say you slip down a step when you're walking down the stairs, slip down the step, you hit the step, your whole body goes tense. And that's an idea here to maintain structural integrity of the body so you don't collapse and fall over. That's the myotatic stretch reflex. And then the next one's called the Golgi tendon reflex, or some people call it the clasp knife reflex. So when the muscle is strongly engaged, this reflex protects the muscle from over-engagement, again from damage, from over-engagement. So the classic example of this is an arm wrestle. Two people arm wrestling, the muscle is very strongly engaged, and then when it thinks it's in danger of overdoing it, the Golgi tendon reflex will cause the muscle to relax, and boom, the other opponent wins. So that's the body working to protect the muscle from overuse. And it's mediated by sensors called Golgi tendon organs, or sensors, and that's embedded in the fascia, in the connective tissue. Actually, it's in the tendon, which is a type of connective tissue. So the Golgi tendon reflex. And then we also have the flexion reflex, and this is all about pain. So a complex reflex which responds to pain signals, causing the muscle to tense in response to pain or to contract in response to pain. You reach out, you touch something that's hot, and suddenly your hand is pulled away. That's our flexion reflex, flexing the body to pull in towards the center. So the consequence of this is that pain, whether it's real or imagined, psychological or in reality, can actually limit our flexibility. It causes the muscles to tense when we feel pain. It causes the muscles to stiffen when we feel pain. So I did a video a little while back, about the whole pain response in the body and how pain has a massive impact on our flexibility and our body's movement. So I'll just reference that, have a look at that one if you're interested a bit further. Of course, stretching also has a big effect on our whole mind-body system. So the idea that a flexible body helps a reflexible mind. And because we see the body and the mind as separate, but actually they're not separate. The mind is in the body and the body is in the mind. So as the body responds and becomes a little bit more flexible, as the nervous system responds, as the tissue responds and lengthens and releases and things, then the whole system benefits from this. Flexible body, flexible mind, flexible system. More range of movement within the whole system, more possibility. Now, what the kind of stretching we do does affect the kind of flexibility that we develop. So fascia, the connective tissue, is both elastic and plastic. So first of all, it's elastic, which means that when you stretch it, it goes back to its original shape afterwards. That's what elastic means. And then as you increase the force, then it gets beyond its elastic limit and becomes what's known as plastic. And plastic means it's a permanent change. So for example, if you stretch a thin shopping bag, like a plastic bag, if you stretch it, to begin with it'll be a little bit, have give, but quite quickly it'll stretch and then not go back to where it was before. That's because it's plastic, and that's the idea. So in the elastic limit of our body's tissues, then we can do things like controlled bouncing stretches. We have to be very careful not to go beyond what's comfortable, but that's it. It can be helpful, like a bouncing movement, working with the elastic recoil capability of the body. In fact, the body makes use of this elasticity a lot in movement, in walking and jumping and things. So we think about elasticity, bounciness, springiness of the tissue working on that level. But we have to be very careful to not activate our reflexes and cause the body to start tensing up, which is what happens if you have high impact sports, for example, running. It causes the body to gradually over time tense up, because each time you feel the impact, the reflex is activated and causes the muscles to tense. That's the myotatic stretch reflex. The impact causes the tensing of the muscles, and over time this becomes a kind of inbuilt habit or permanent change. And then on the plastic limit, so we could think about moving into the plastic limit. Again, we have to be very careful. So this would be the area of long-held stretches, particularly passive stretches, and working with what's known as the adaptive method of stretching, which is where we go into a stretch and we let the reflex die away, the feeling of the stretch die away. We go a little bit further and we let it die away, and we kind of move a little bit deeper and deeper until we get to the point where the muscle is stretching, or the muscle and tissue is stretching, and then it's going to hold that stretch and not recoil to where it was before. So this is the plastic limit. And it particularly works over time. If we do this again and again and again over a long period of time, then the body will start to adapt. We move to the plastic limit, gentle stretching, very conscious and aware and kind, of course, always, but then the body will start to adapt and become used to it. The nervous system adapts and becomes used to it, and we end up with a slightly more flexible body. We can work isometrically or dynamically. Isometric means holding the same shape, or dynamically means moving in and out of it. So dynamic stretching might be where the tissues under stretch are actually working, contracting or taking load at the same time. Dynamically might be with the breath, that kind of thing. All these ways we do it in yoga. So whatever we're doing, the nervous system also has to learn to be comfortable with the new length of flexibility. So lots of what we feel in stretching is a nervous system being worried and protecting ourselves. So we have to kind of teach the nervous system gradually, teaching those unconscious or subconscious layers of the body to feel safe. And this is where an important part of our yoga work is that we're doing it in an environment which feels safe, we feel fully in control, we're fully aware and present with what we're doing. We're listening and we're responding to what's going on. So we need deep, deep kindness to do this. Stretching is an act of kindness. It's an attitude of encouragement rather than forcing. Just inviting the body to find more movement. And then also to think about the extracellular matrix, the other component which we mentioned. The tissues in the body, especially the connective tissue, the fascia, receives a lot of its nutrients via the ECM, the matrix, via this kind of diffusion of chemicals. So the fluid component of the body, the lymph, the fluid, the hydration, lots of nutrients in there, diffuses into the fascia. And of course, when we're thinking about the fluid, the water is kind of like a lubricant. So that's where hydration is really important. The more hydrated we are, the more that the layers of tissue are able to slip and slide over each other, and the more fluid our body is. So very important to maintain good hydration. So just to kind of put it all together then, so the tissues are designed to change gradually in response to a repeated movement or stimulus. The body is adaptive. It changes in response to what we do. So if we think about doing it regularly over a long period of time, there will be changes. This is why repetition is so important. Yeah. Also, the nervous system takes time to adapt to or readjust maybe to a new level of flexibility or movement possibilities. And so that's why I often tell people, think about stretching being kind of like a year-long project or those kind of things. So think about multiple years or a year-long time scale. Because if we think about it in that term, if we're repeating and working on things gradually over a year, then it stops us from getting into this, I want it now, I want to force things, I push it too hard, and then of course everything tenses up and we do ourselves damage. And then stretching helps us to develop our relationship with our body, helps us to develop that sense of attitude of encouragement, curiosity, kindness, our ability to be able to sense and feel different parts of the body. Of course, stretching generates sensation, which becomes a focus for our mindfulness. That's an important aspect as well. We're developing and deepening our relationship with our body. The mind embedded within the body becomes more conscious, more aware. So all about listening, responding, and kindness, and developing this relationship. That's what stretching is all about to me.